Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Liam Rose. I'm an author, mentor, life coach, motivational speaker, evangelist, musician, and activist. In this audio and podcast, we're going to be sharing a message. I've been sharing the Spiritually Helping Other People podcast to inspire humanity to go through a spiritual change, to learn about Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha, and to learn about the no self and selflessness. Now, in this message, we're going to be sharing an important message, and this message is called Spiritual Successes and Spiritual Failures. Now, in life, we both have successes and failures within life. So, spiritual successes, spiritual failures. Now, it's important to learn within life, the importance of spiritual successes and spiritual failures. Each success and each failure can teach you a lesson. It's important we learn the lessons from our failures and also from our successes. Life is always with a balance. It has the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, the good and the evil. So everything is always in opposites. So the spiritual successes that you have in life will be very important to you. These would be the things that make you joyful, happy, content, gratitude, make you feel happy and make you feel fulfilled. Then you have the spiritual failures in life that will make you feel vulnerable, depressed, unhappy, sad, down, low. So it's important in life to understand both of the opposites, spiritual successes and spiritual failures. Now, it's important to realize no matter where you are in your life, from what path you're going down with in life, you will have spiritual successes and you will have spiritual failures. So it's important to learn how to manage both the successes and both the failures. Life has a way of moving forward. So no matter what you've gone through in your life, no matter what you've experienced and the challenges or the successes you've had in your life has a way of moving forward. Life is always asking us to give something to life. So no matter if you've had successful things in life or failure things in life is always going to move forward. So the important thing to learn is spiritual successes can come into your life if you do what Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha has called you to do. Spiritual failures will come into your life if you don't do what Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha has called you to do. So you have to make a choice. You have to make a decision. If you want spiritual successes, which is spiritual blessings, you need to do what Jesus Christ and Jehovah has called you to do. Follow the spiritual path in life and follow your calling. If you want spiritual failures in life, which basically just means not understanding life, not understanding the importance of life itself, then you'll go through spiritual failures. Now, there's lots of different things in life that we can talk about. We've got career, employment, jobs, we've got volunteering, we've got businesses, entrepreneurship, we've got religion, we have family, friends, loved ones, partners, spouse, children. So there's so many different things in part of life. Life is not just made up of one thing. Life is made up of lots of different things. So it's important to learn, it's important to realize. You learn from the spiritual successes and you also learn from the spiritual failures. Life is a school that teaches you how you can live your life and how you can be in life. The spiritual successes and the spiritual failures are all part of life. It's part of your journey as a human being living in life. So it's important to realize that if we do want more success than failures, we need to do what we're spiritually called to do, and we need to honor our relationship with Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha. Now, I'm not saying to the viewers and the listeners who are listening to the spiritual successes and spiritual failures that everything is to do with faith and spirituality. But what I'm trying to get the message across today is that faith and spirituality has a place in life. A lot of people are going through suffering, pain and adversity and failures within life because they don't have faith and spirituality. And the people that do have spiritual successes in life have found their faith and spirituality. So it's important to realize that life is always moving forward into the future. How you live your life day to day now matters how you live in the future. So if you want your life to change, and I've always encouraged the listeners and the viewers to go for a spiritual change. A spiritual change doesn't mean that you're not going to go through life's difficulties, suffering, pains, and adversities and challenges. Because as part of life, we have the opposites. We have the good and the bad, the good and the evil, the positive and the negative, the ups and the downs, the high and the lows. So life is filled with all of that in life. You can't have the good things in life if you haven't gone through the bad things in life. You can't experience the fulfillment in life if you haven't gone through sadness in life. So everything in life is always with the opposites. It's always positive, negative, bad, good, good, bad, high, low, suffering, pain, and adversity, fulfillment, joy, happiness. So it comes in life. It's a completely like a life cycle, right? So we don't know what we're going to experience in life when we're born. No human being does. No human being knows what family they're going to have, what children they're going to have, what relationship they're going to have, what business or job or career or volunteering they're going to have, how their life's going to turn out into the future. As human beings and as people, we don't have the answer to that. We really don't know. So that means if we don't know the answer to that, which we know human being knows the answer to that, that means life is always going on a journey of life. And the journey of life is about discovery. If you discover what you can learn from your spiritual successes, and if you can discover what you can learn from your spiritual failures, then you learn the importance of life. And life is here to teach you lessons. It's here to encourage you, to motivate you, to guide you. Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha wants us to really, go for a spiritual change, because the spiritual change becomes the most important thing. But not just go for a spiritual change, but also learn the success of our life and learn the failures of our life. Now, it's very important that we understand that, life is always moving forward. So no matter, where you are today in your life, your family, your children, your husband, your wife, your spouse, your relationship, your job, your career, your employment, your business, your entrepreneurship, your faith, your spiritual, your religion, your volunteering. Everything is always moving forward. Life is always moving forward. So it's important what we do day to day within our lives. That's what's going to make the difference between successful things in life or failure things in life. If we want spiritual successes in life, we must go for a spiritual change in order to have spiritual successes. Spiritual successes doesn't mean you don't go through suffering, pain, and adversity like I said before. It means you've changed yourself as a human being and you've gone through a process. When you go through a process and you understand the process you've gone through, that leads into blessings. Now, I said earlier in this audio and podcast already, we can't experience the joy, the happiness, gratitude, fulfillment of our lives if we don't go through the sadness, pain, adversity, and suffering within our lives. So that means life is always on a journey. You're living a journey within your life. Each different parts of the stage of the journey is teaching you lessons along the way. If you have a successful business, that's teaching you lessons. If you had a failure business, that's teaching you lessons. If you have a good career, that's teaching you lessons. If you have a failed career, that's teaching you lessons. If you have a good job, that's teaching you lessons. If you have a failure job, that's teaching you lessons. If you're doing a volunteering opportunity, that's teaching you lessons. If you're not doing a volunteering opportunity, that's also teaching you lessons. So in life, there's always the opposites. There's always success and there's always failure. We have to spiritually change in order to find success. And we have to spiritually change in order to basically live what we're called to do, right? So Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha is calling you to give something to life. We're all called to give something to life, right? So life is asking us to give something to life. to help life in a certain way. Now, I'm not saying to the listeners who are listening this is going to be an easy journey, because there's no such thing in life as an easy journey. Life has its opposites. There'll be days where you feel very happy, very joyful, very content, have a lot of gratitude, have a lot of happiness. And there will be days when you feel sadness, pain, suffering, adversity, disappointments, hardship, struggles, challenges, and difficulties. So life is always having the balance. But what's important is how we live our life while we're going through the balances and going through the opposites. If we go through a spiritual change, which I normally say in my podcasts and audios, the spiritual change in the psyche and the psychological mind. If you spiritually change your psyche and your psychological mind, you spiritually change your life. If you spiritually change your life, you spiritually change yourself as a human being. If you spiritually change yourself as a human being, then you'll be living your spiritual calling and your spiritual life purpose. So I'm not telling someone it's going to be an easy journey, because life isn't like that. And I'm not telling someone it's just going to be all successful without going through the failures. So spiritual successes come to those people who've gone through a spiritual change. Spiritual failures come to those people who haven't gone through a spiritual change. Some people say this is what we call black and white thinking, and some people just say this is just the journey of life, of how it is. If life is calling you to give something to life, all human beings are called to give something. The real hard challenges is what are we meant to give? What are we meant to do? Who are we meant to become? Now, this can become tricky for a lot of human beings who haven't gone through a process of spiritual change within the psyche and the psychological mind. So I'll put it to you in the audio in a very important way. Now, with spiritual successes, we have to take spiritual actions in order to get spiritual successes. Now, spiritual successes doesn't mean, you're not going to go on the journey, because how life is, you're always on a journey in life, in just every single day life. So it doesn't mean you're not going to go on the journey. But what it does mean is that you can learn things within the journey to help you. Now, it's very, very important that we take spiritual actions. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is spiritual actions? What is spiritual actions? What is it? Now, people that don't do spiritual actions don't get spiritual blessings. So if you don't take spiritual actions, you won't get spiritual blessings. So what is spiritual actions? Spiritual actions is contributions. Contributions is helping other people, helping the animals, helping the universe. So your spiritual actions should be helping other people, helping the animals, helping the universe. Now, all of this comes from a spiritual change. If you spiritually change your psyche and your psychological mind, which is the hardest thing to do in life, then you can take spiritual actions. And when you take spiritual actions, you're not going to go through spiritual failures, because you're taking spiritual actions. Now, life is always asking us to give something, like I've said a few times in this podcast already. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what are we going to give? What are we going to do? How are we going to live our life? Now, it's hard for people to learn this, but it's very important for people to learn this. You can't get trapped within the system. You can't get trapped within just doing the normal day-to-day routine life. And if you get trapped in doing the normal day-to-day routine life, you just go to a job, you just go to a volunteering opportunity, you just go to an employment, you just have your career, you just have your business and entrepreneurship, you just have your religion, your faith in your church and your spirituality. If you just stick to the normal side of things, that's what I'm just going to call it, like the normal side of things, without going through a process of spiritual change in your psyche and your psychological mind, that is where spiritual failures come from, because you haven't changed yourself within life in order to find out what you're really basically called to do in life. Now, helping the animals, helping the universe, helping humanity is the spiritual change we need to go through. Each human being needs to go through that. If you don't go through that spiritual change, then all your life will be with spiritual failures. I'm not saying that you can't have a family, you can't have a relationship, you can't have children, you can't have a business, you can't have a career, you can't have a job, you can't have employment, you can't have volunteering. You can have all the things you perceive yourself to have in life and you want within your life, if that's something you want. But if you want to get to what Jesus Christ and Jehovah and Buddha is calling us to do, each human being needs to find it for themselves. You've got to go through a spiritual change, and a spiritual change changes your psyche and your psychological mind. So if your psyche and your psychological mind changes, that means your life changes. If your life changes, that means you're going to be living your life more spiritual, faithful and truthful. If you live your life more spiritual, faithful and truthful, it means you've gone through the process of spiritual change. Spiritual change is not religion, and spiritual change is not doing the day-to-day routine of things. It's quite the opposite of that. Not saying that religion doesn't have a place, and not saying that faith and spirituality doesn't have a place. They all have a place within life. But what I'm trying to get across within this podcast and in this audio, spiritual successes and spiritual failures are part of the opposites. So in life, which is very important to learn, you have to choose what you want at the very beginning. You have to choose what you want. Do you want spiritual blessings, spiritual successes? Do you want to experience happiness, joy and fulfillment and contentment and gratitude? Or do you want to go through life going through suffering, going through pain, going through adversity, going through challenges, going through difficulties, and always going through spiritual failures? Now, just before we finish this audio, there is a way to overcome all suffering, pain and adversity. So the question is, how do you overcome all pain, suffering and adversity? How do you do that? And it goes back to what I've been sharing in this podcast from the very beginning of it. You go through a spiritual change, because when you go through a spiritual change, you change your psyche and your psychological mind. If you change your psyche and your psychological mind, that changes your life. And if that changes your life, it means you change as a human being. The hardest thing to find in life is people who have changed as a human being. It's the most difficult thing to find in life. But finding people who have changed in life, you see something about their life, and I'll tell you what you see, and we'll finish the podcast just as I mentioned this. So with spiritual people who have changed their life, right, and I'm not saying that this happens for everybody. It probably wouldn't happen for everybody, because it's quite hard to separate the opposites between spiritual successes and spiritual failures. But it goes back to what I said in the audio and the message. When you see a spiritual person who's gone through a spiritual change, they're very unique and it's like a rare gift they are to the world, society and humanity. They're a rare gift. But what you find in them is this: they're spiritually helping other people, they're spiritually helping the animals, they're spiritually helping the universe, because they've spiritually changed. When you spiritually change, it goes to something we call the no self and selflessness. No self and selflessness is a spiritual change of the self, which means you don't have no more self within you. You're not living your life worried about your spiritual failures, because you've transcended your spiritual failures. When you've transcended your spiritual failures, that's the only way you see spiritual success. So just before we finish, let me just say it again. When you transcend your spiritual failures, and everyone will go through failure within their life. Every human being will. That's the only way you see spiritual success. So it goes back to what I said in the audio. I'm not necessarily telling people you're not going to go through suffering, pain, and adversity. You probably will go through suffering, pain, and adversity. The question is how do you manage and separate the good from the bad, the good from the evil, the positive from the negative, the ups from the lows, the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows? How do you separate that? The only way you separate it is by going through a spiritual change, and that is the key of life. When you've gone through a spiritual change, it's not like saying that you won't have like things that you want in your life. Everybody has things that they want in their life. Everybody has something that's very important to them, right? So I'm not necessarily telling people you're not going to get certain things within your life, because you will. Everybody will. Everyone will have the family, the friends, the spouse, the husband, the wife, the children, the car, the money, the income. We'll all have that. But if you want to get to spiritual success and not have spiritual failures, your psyche and your psychological mind has to change first. And that's there's nothing more difficult than that to find in life. So I hope this has helped, and I hope I've shared the message that it's just very important to learn. And just before we finish, life is a school. Life teaches you lessons along the journey. So just before we finish, say for example, if you did go through spiritual failures, and it could be, I don't want to list where it could be, because for each human being it will be a different thing. A lost relationship, a lost job, a lost career, a lost business, someone passes away, financial worries, issues, I don't know, the list can go on with what people probably go through, right? But if you don't transcend the spiritual failures, which every human being needs to do to find spiritual success, spiritual success is not based on you. Let me put it again. I'll say it again. Spiritual success is not based on you. You can only get to that mindset within your life when you've gone through a spiritual change. Spiritual success is not based on you. It's based on what I said in the audio and the message. Helping other people, helping humanity, helping the animals, helping the universe. That is spiritual success. If you help other people, help the animals, and help the universe, you can find spiritual blessings. And spiritual blessings, and as I say this today, it's the truth. Spiritual blessings will still not be based on you. It'll be based on what I said earlier, the contributions you do, the difference you make, and the impact you do having to helping other people, helping the animals, helping the universe. So we all are going, basically how it is, we're all going to go through suffering, pain and adversity. The only slight difference is, how do you manage it? How do you cope with it? And the question is, what do you learn from it? I'll repeat it again and we'll finish. What do you learn from it? What are the lessons that you've learned from either the spiritual successes you've had, or it could not be that. It could be the spiritual failures you had. What are the life lessons you've learned along the journey? Okay, thank you for listening now. This was quite a long podcast audio. Okay, thank you now. Bye now. Thanks.